if I'll be also spotty the sound and the video component and it comes through. Maybe it's the Wi-Fi, maybe it's just Zoom thing, but just let me know if I need to backtrack and replay. I'll try to do that. Okay. Thank you for doing the hardest part for me. And that's the worst thing. I can't really figure out how to do it, to introduce myself. I think you did the 30-second elevator pitch. I'm just going to add very little something that you haven't mentioned. I saw you actually did mention I'm based out of New York City. This is my hometown, although I have traveled the world servicing my clients and employers in the past. And of course, I try to stay away from the word "a" as much as I can, because it has been so brutally bastardized and brutalized. So I'll try to substitute as much as I can. In fact, I don't use the word agile in my lexicon anymore. I try to substitute it with the word adaptive. But I am focused on organizations of various sizes, various lines of business, org design, system modeling, coaching, training, consulting. Those are my facets. Those are my things that I do. Now, I am pretty accessible, pretty transparent, and if you want to reach out to me, I kind of give it out right up front, so you have it handy. My email, my LinkedIn, my personal website with the contact form, my own meetup, which is the biggest one in the world, the Large Scale Scrum Meetup, which I have been building since 2015, pushing 3,000. You also have a great one and big one too, so I know how long and how much it takes to build one. I have a free Slack channel. I invite everyone to join. If you have any questions, post this event. I'm happy to entertain. So feel free to join. And by the way, Tagi mentioned I'll be sharing the deck so you can have the link. I do train regularly every week. And by all means, if you have any interest in learning in a structured way, I teach specific large-scale Scrum. But there are other things I also do virtually. Please reach out to me and ask me questions. Now, this is something I wanted to set. I wanted to set the stage up front about this. I get this all the time, not all the time, but often enough. People ask me, "Why aren't you like this? Why aren't you always cheering and you know why don't you live in the la-la land? And why don't you talk about greatness and successes of agile transformations? Why aren't you upbeat and positive?" Well, let me tell you one thing. This is certainly not me. I'm not someone who would just brag about greatness and successes without giving you the real McCoy, the real face value. But I'm neither this. I'm not someone who is always a pessimist. I try to be a realist. I try to be someone who thinks hard. Sometimes it's good thinking. Sometimes it's not such good thinking. And I hope I will come to the realization. So I wish for you the same. So that's kind of to give you a bit about my personality, so you understand. You're not talking to a pessimist. You're not talking to someone who always sees things in dark colors. You're talking to someone who understands the significance of seeing and speaking reality. Now, I want to mention a few very important things up front. First, this is something that many people and some organizations fail to understand. Organizational structure, organizational design is the first order variable that defines ecosystem, organizational ecosystem. Culture, mindset, behaviors, all of the things just come later. We oftentimes hear people talking about values and behaviors, and let's change these people's mindset to be more agile. Well, in our reality, we have almost 100 people on the call, all mature adults. Many have families and children that they have been raising. What would make you change your mindset significantly if nothing around you has changed? And by means of saying this, I'm trying to allude to the fact that unless you change the ecosystemic surrounding around a person, it is unlikely that they will fundamentally change or anyway significantly change the way they behave and act and think. So it is really about org design and org dynamics that surround us that needs to be addressed first, and everything else will just follow. And this is where we oftentimes see less experienced coaches not stressing enough to senior management when they coach them. What I just said actually jives very well with the fifth law of Larman's laws of organizational behavior, And although you can paraphrase the first four on your own, you can just read through and understand some of the existing organizational complexity we're up against. The number 5 I'm going to speak up about. I'm going to speak about culture follows structure. Organizational culture, behaviors, norms, what we just mentioned, are corollary to organizational structure and system dynamics that surround it. Okay. Also taken from Craig back in 2015 on the Scrum Alliance website. He posted an article, and I actually refer to this. I refer to this as a sushi roll. If you like sushi, I like sushi. In order to get a full flavor of a sushi roll, you need to cut across through a sushi through rice and seaweed layer and all other layers. And this is my way of saying, kind of paraphrasing what this paragraph says. Organizational agility cannot be sustained just by addressing technology or research and development. You have to cut across multiple organizational facets: legal practices, product management, HR policies, site strategies, many of the things that usually left behind in agile transformations. And you end up looking at things that are pretty critical, pretty important, but not sufficient to make long-lasting, sustainable changes. Okay. Now, I'm going to raise your awareness. I'm going to give you some upfront warning, because this is about masquerades and theaters, right? The whole talk is about things to look out for. So I'm going to give you a few pieces of information that may or may not jive well. It may take you a little bit out of your comfort zone, depending what experience you've had, but hopefully it's going to be for better. Now, I refer to this as a triple taxation on client companies. Okay, you may have seen this, you may have experienced this, but you haven't figured out how to coin this. When you have a very large consultancy with a large big bang agile transformation approach rolling into your company, and with that comes a very heavy, very monolithic, unpack and install big bang agile framework, of course, needless to say, is being supported by very well configured so-called agile tool with a very heavy portfolio management module to it. You are going to pay a pretty penny, right? If you have any friends in vendor management or accounts payable or budgeting, just ask them how much money every year, every quarter a company spends today on funding this approach, okay? And maybe then you can do like compare and contrast with a return on investment. You will probably end up with very, very serious numbers, okay? I am definitely inviting you to do this and think about it holistically, how this all works together. And you may want to take a look at this as well. How many unqualified middlemen do you really want to pay to bring perhaps some skilled consultants and coaches in-house? Like, think of this as a way of illustrating these little green figures of good people that are experienced and knowledgeable in a huge whirlpool of people that are probably coaches in name only. And as they go through this grinding machine, a food chain of processing resources, they end up with large consultancies that then feed these people to client companies. You can easily avoid this problem if you build an internal agile coaching and consulting vetting expertise in-house. And if you really need just a few smart and eloquent and experienced people, you can do that without going through these multi-tier problems, okay? Of course, this problem speaks for itself. This is another example of a masquerade. And again, if you have any people that are in budget and finance or vendor management, you ask them how much extra cash being spent, being wasted on dealing with external agencies and external consulting firms that bring probably very little value to the plate. Okay. A couple of weeks back, I was honored to have in my own meetup a well-known gentleman by name Dave Snowden of the UK, and he spoke very candidly, very provocatively about some of the challenges he's seen in the industry. They're very much in line with what I am going to talk about today. And of course, it really boils down to the same thing. the industry today has been grossly overloaded, bloated, overwhelmed with low quality stuff. Low quality stuff that is also very popular stuff. And this is something that hurts professionals, hurts companies, and really drives the whole industry and the whole marketplace down. Another problem that you should be aware of, and I actually refer to this LinkedIn post that you may check out on your own. Again, many companies fall for that. They look for accreditation from organizations that are in this business for the sake of business, and they just jumped on a bandwagon because it's just lucrative business for many. There are quite a few cases out there that support this argument. Very few organizations that are truly accredited and reputable out there. And of course, if you get candidates with accreditations from those organizations, you're at much lesser risk than if you get people from some XYZ organization with a stamp of a certificate category XYZ, someone who passed a 60-minute online course, which pretty much impossible to fail. Now, internally, organizationally, one of the good examples of things getting out of hands and becoming a masquerade is this. If your organization is just only looking at agile maturity metrics, and they are also tied to bonuses and rewards, most likely you're in the environment where agility is really not valued, and people are just competing for X percentage of subjective agility, so they can earn some perks. Okay, and we oftentimes see this happening with organizations where there are 5-7 year plans to become more agile. Clearly, there are different ways to teach, and I have coined this term. Hopefully, you don't confuse it with the TDD, which is the test-driven development, which is an amazing thing to have. I have boiled this down to deck-driven transformation approach. That is what we typically see done by large consultancies at a pretty penny. It costs a lot. Knowledge retention, on the other hand, is not so deep. Of course, there are other ways to do it with very deep learning, with very hands-on approach where people actually model their own system in class for many days in a very informal way. This is one of the examples of large-scale Scrum training. Unfortunately, we're not in classrooms because of COVID, but when we go back there, that's what we plan to do. Today, we just do things online. But again, there's a difference between delivering something with a thick deck, a fine print, and engaging people in very deep learning through system thinking and lean thinking and hands-on system modeling. This is really a masquerade where this is a possible alternative, right? So think good with the bad. This one is available on our less.work side. Also, you may think of the left-hand side as something that I often see this a lot. You walk into an organization that is on the bandwagon of agile transformation, but it's so superficial. It's not that the things that are listed on the left-hand side are not important. It's just they're not the most important things. By far not the most important things. Very superficial, very broad, very shallow, very big bang kind of thing. We're going to unpack and install this solution. We're going to change labels and terminology, but we're not really going to look at ways to fundamentally, deeply change anything that's meaningful. For instance, on the right-hand side, you see another way of doing things. In large-scale Scrum, for example, we follow 3 adoption principles. We do things deep and narrow as opposed to broad and shallow. We go top down and bottom up at the same time, and we use a lot of volunteer. We do not superimpose. We do not force people into frameworks. We do not do this by a mandate. And of course, you need senior management support, not just in spirit and in slogans, but with real Gemba. People need to go and see where action is. People need to learn and support the organizations in those changes. This is another example of a masquerade. I'm not sure if you've seen this. I've seen this a lot. Once an organization gets on the journey of becoming more agile, we oftentimes see individuals basically overloading their own titles overnight. I call it an Agile identity transformation center, and then they go through the Stargate and they become Agile coaches and Scrum masters. Whatever they used to be on Friday, on Monday, they are already someone else. And if you take this a little deeper, and you can probably figure out by now, I like cartoons. These are all self-made. Look at the right-hand side. This gentleman, or doesn't really matter the gender here, is trying to fast-track his career development by jumping from a very slow-moving escalator of the old role of going from one level onto another by stepping up real fast, real high, and becoming now overnight an Agile coach. And of course, it's in pursuit of career development. I get that, but it's also in pursuit of monetary incentives and promotion. This is a very bad way to advance your career as an organizational coach, as an Agile coach. Whereas on the left-hand side, you see a much better journey for someone to develop themselves into a catalytic servant leader through lots of learning, through coaching and being coached, through mentoring and being mentored, et cetera, et cetera. So take good with the bad here, right? Now, I don't expect you people, I don't expect everyone to be SQL developers here, but this probably doesn't require much of SQL understanding. I personally admire when an organization makes a real meaningful decision at HR level, doesn't leave HR behind, Agile transformation, takes it along, and introduces genuinely real Agile roles into the HR database. But if you run a SQL query overnight against the table in HR database and just substitute old roles with new roles, take a senior project manager, make them a senior Agile coach, or take a junior PM and make them a Scrum master, that just defeats the whole purpose. And some organizations have gone down this path. It's a trap. They just look at the pay grade of someone. Okay, well, now this person is going to play the role because it just makes sense for them to be that person because it's very close. They're doing business analysis. There must be a good product owner. This can be as far as reality as we could get. And the pay grade is about what we're willing to pay for the role. So let's relabel that. So this is a huge masquerade. And of course, there is a different way to do it. Like for instance, in large-scale Scrum, we treat a Scrum Master as a fully dedicated role that can support between 1 and 3 teams. And this role doesn't go away. It's a full-time, considered as a job. We require a person to be a very seasoned, a team-level coach who is able to change their focus maybe over time from product owners and teams onto organizational design and development practices. But the role does not go away. So whereas this is a clear masquerade, this is a real thing. At least this is something that is a strongly recommended alternative. Take seriously Agile roles, do not trivialize them, and do not make them of secondary importance and just by means of mapping old roles into new roles, create these roles organizationally. Another example of a masquerade. I'm not sure what your companies do. I've seen this quite a lot. A real product owner is somewhere up there, potentially is a great candidate to become a PO or already is a PO. Imagine how badly this person will be discouraged if they cannot be handling their own work in a meaningful way as it's meant for a product owner. If they are discouraged, I can almost guarantee you the next thing is going to happen. They're going to look for a proxy. And then you're gonna have a proxy of a proxy and a proxy of a proxy. So the length of a feedback loop here between a product owner and a developer is huge. It isn't sustainable of agility. It's not supportive of agility. You're not gonna have a sustainable agility. It's not supportive of agility. You cannot really run healthy Scrum this way. And needless to say, you're not gonna be able to run anything that is at scale, like large-scale Scrum, for instance, will not work with this approach. The alternative to this would be what? The alternative to this would be having a product owner in very close proximity with users and customers, and in very close proximity with teams. And the way to make this sane in a scaled environment for an individual so they don't get overloaded you clearly separate between prioritization and clarification. So all prioritization flows from a product owner onto teams, whereas clarification goes directly from users and customers onto teams. Very close proximity. No interim layers, no middleman, no translators, no surrogates, no proxies. So this is a real masquerade. This is an alternative to that masquerade. I've been to one or two maybe in my life. I'm sure you've done that too, some of them at least, blind dates. But when it comes to experimenting with your product development teams, I do not recommend doing that. This is an example of a masquerade where you see, used to be a project manager on Friday, now a Scrum Master on Monday, and used to be a business analyst on Friday, now a product owner on Monday. And of course, someone has to get the short end of the stick. And who suffers typically? It's the team, because they can get true guidance and mentorship and the coaching from a Scrum Master, because he or she is not equipped with knowledge, and they can't really get good prioritization from a product owner because this person is not authorized to set priorities. Of course, to this masquerade, we have this alternative when a product owner is in very close proximity to a Scrum Master and teams and customers, and prioritization flows directly from a true product owner onto real teams. The next example of a masquerade would be around how to position your coaches internally so they can provide most majority of benefit, most benefit to your teams and individuals. Now, what you see on the left-hand side is a masquerade. I refer to it as a parrot tower, country club of superheroes. They're most likely coaches in name only. If you recall that a prior slide of SQL database update, most likely these people have done very little true coaching. They don't have real experience. They don't have proper education or mindset, but they have organized around the centralized tower of best practices. And this is how you end up with metrics and lots of wiki pages and heavy documentation, progress reports, rack statuses, and of course the loop between these coaches and real teams is very long. We call these fly-by coaches or one-night stand coaches. They fly by, they set best practices, and they move on. The alternative to this would be to position coaches in very close proximity with teams and products that they work on, make a very lateral, very flat organizational structure that doesn't have much hierarchy to it, and create a short catwalk between these coaches and senior management so that they can coach at all levels. This is in fact what we strongly recommend in large-scale Scrum. We don't recommend these high apex tower of command and control so-called coaching. This is a pass-by slide I'm going to mention just real quick. You may have seen this in your organization where we refer to these as architects cosmonauts or architects astronauts, depending what language you use. These people fly very high up in the stratosphere and they set best practices in architecture for teams and individuals. In fact, these people have been very detached from real development. Some of them maybe have done some development in the past, but not for years. For them, becoming this chief architect is now an elevation organizationally and a way to get promoted. So these people really are not hands-on people and are very detached from true engineering, real agile development, real practices. So this is really not a good way to go. There are other things we can look at together and be more agile in and more adaptive in ways we address product development. We can look at some great agile engineering practices. We really want our individuals that are architects be also on teams and be also developers, hands-on developers. So whereas this is a masquerade, this is clearly an alternative to it. Next one is going to be a little bit animated. So think of it this way: if you have Scrum, and I appreciate Scrum, I think it's an amazing way to work on a product in a customer-centric, feature-centric way for a well identified well-defined customer for a product owner. Imagine this Scrum, poor Scrum is being surrounded by siloed teams of architects and other groups that really have all the authority and the power. It's also been circumvented by agile managers and conductors and coordinators and orchestrators. It sits under the heavy weight of KPIs, regs, and various agile maturity metrics. It's got, now I'm being a little sarcastic and facetious, right? It's got agile cars, planes, ships, and trains. It's got oceans of seas and rivers and streams that under which it's buried. And it's got projects and programs and portfolios that sit on top of it, right? And of course, we're just talking about this version alone. There's so many more versions to come that you're gonna have to pay for, okay? Now, how is this not a masquerade? Where is customer centricity? Where is the feedback loop between customers and developers? I mean, I suppose these are developers, but where are the customers? How about real organizational agility? Adaptiveness is the right word. If something needs to change, how long is the feedback cycle? How short is the feedback loop between concept and cache, between when we discover something, maybe in marketing or in sales, and the time this information goes down to teams? And quite frankly, if you think about it very skeptically, if you install this approach, what has fundamentally changed since the moment when you started adopting a year ago? Most likely not a lot. Some roles may have changed, some labels, but fundamentally people did not change doing what they used to be doing. There's another way to look at this problem. Well, it's slightly different flavor of the problem. Imagine this organizational structure that is very vertical. It's a conventional, it's a traditional organizational structure, and it's flipped on its side. It's called a chapter, right? You just take it at its take it verbatim and flip it on its side 90 degrees, while reporting lines and management relationships and individual performance by chapter leads now it has retained. That's a masquerade. Then you take an existing geographically dispersed single function, single component group, and just relabel it into squad because it's a very fancy name now. How is this not a masquerade? And then you take a bunch of these squads and staple them together and you call it a tribe. And guess what? Majority of these tribes, and I've seen this at least at a handful of organizations, there used to be artificial fake portfolios of very complex efforts that are built of programs and projects that are stapled together, and now they just relabeled their tribes. So the whole notion of that term is gone. And in fact, if you ask those people that were in place and at the time where I'm not going to drop this name, but you can figure out what this so-called framework is, or the model is. There was never a model, by the way. They tell you, do not copy and paste from us. What we did made sense for us when we were a small 50, 60 man company. Please do not do that. How many organizations today just copy and paste? I don't expect you to read everything verbatim here, but word for word, but I'm sure you can recognize this. And many organizations have gone down this path. And this is nothing but a masquerade, because there isn't really much changes going on. And the worst part is when it's a large consultancy that has been fooling around with this internally, not having much success, yet selling it to their clients at a very high dollar or pound or whatever currency they use. So that's a pretty penny. Of course, there's a different way to do it, okay? You can build a real product group in large-scale Scrum. 2 to 8 teams work together on the same product for the same product owner out of the same backlog, very lean, very, in a very descaled way. And by the way, large-scale Scrum is called scale. The word scaling in it, but there is nothing about scaling. It's mostly descaling, because we're simplifying organizational structure. We're removing waste. We're removing interim layers. So there's a way to do it, of course. You just need to understand. You just have to start appreciating the simplicity, the beauty in simplicity. Not the beauty. The beauty is not in complexity. the beauty in simplicity. There's much more with less. Now I'm using less as an adjective. Yeah, you can definitely build real teams, real feature teams, feature-centric, customer-centric, user-centric, product-centric teams, as opposed to component teams or single functional specialty teams that work in a very siloed way. And we also see lots of local optimization with that, when everyone is local optimized to do the best they can to perpetuate their own existence, to create work for themselves. And you can definitely find a good alternative to creating a fake chapter that is nothing but a flipped on its side existing organizational structure. For instance, in large-scale Scrum, we strongly support the need of having a community, but the community is treated as a real community with the goal of the main purpose of which is functional learning. You can join and you can leave it at any time. It's only by volunteering. That's why you have this, 3 volunteers running, showing their shirts. And communities can be born and die out if they are no longer needed. But communities are not another way of describing an existing organizational structure being flipped on its side, camouflaged and masqueraded into a so-called, they call it whatever they call it, but it's just an organizational structure that was flipped 90 degrees without much change going on. And of course, this is a good alternative. Now, I don't want to get too political. And in fact, I'm far from being a politician here, but you can recognize this hat and probably can imagine the man behind him, behind his hat, right? What I'm going to say, I'm going to plagiarize a little bit from the approach. I'm going to say this. I appreciate and respect and admire what these 17 guys did together back in 2001. I really admire and I love the manifesto. So my genuine invitation to all of you to wear this hat, perhaps, and that's my way of coining this. Let's make agility great again. Okay. It is not just about one country. It's not, of course, not about America or Germany or any other country. It's about agility. We really need to get back to the foundations. We need to get back to the, consider these as forefathers, if you will. Well, again, not to get too political or historical, but we really need to reset on what real agility was meant to be. And, please understand, the industry is tired and worn out by now. And I'm sure you've been around and you've seen some of the trends and shifts in the industry. Companies are really frustrated with having very little improvements. If you look at how much money they spend to make these so-called improvements. The balloon, this is a balloon that at one point is going to burst. I mean, you can't, it's going to be another management fad 101 or 102. So sooner or later, it may become a fad. All of these masquerades, all of these agile theater things that we mentioned, they will eventually blow up. So the question is, what do you want to be? Ahead of the curve, or maybe either on the curve or behind the curve? Because if we go with the mainstream at the moment, we see a lot of dilution in quality. We see a lot of dilution in values. We see just things that probably are much, not valuable. We really, in order to start adding more value, we need to start removing. Well, less is more, in fact. So in that regard, fewer roles, but more people with more roles, but fewer people with more roles, fewer protocols, fewer organizational layers, less complexity. This is what we really are going to benefit from. And it really depends where you want to position yourself, whether you're a Scrum Master, or a coach, or someone who is just an evangelist and pushing and is really supportive of adaptive ways of working. Maybe you're a software developer, maybe someone who understands architecture well, maybe you come from business. It really depends where you want to place yourself. So I'm going to pause. I think I have reached the last page of my not so busy deck. And I'm going to open up the floor, folks. Maybe you have any questions. I think I did okay on time. Taggy, please keep me honest.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Gene. So we got the Slido running. I've got a bunch of questions there. So maybe we can pause for a minute so you have time to add any additional questions. And at the meantime, we can start going through them. Gene, maybe. Do you want to go through the questions and pick the ones you want, or should I read them to you?
I'm okay one way or the other. I think I caught my breath. I'm okay. So
okay.
I can speak now again if needed, or whichever way you would like.
So what I'm going to do is read. So the questions have been kind of upvoted by members. So I'm going to read from top to bottom. We've got about 15 minutes, and we'll see where we land.
Sure.
Okay, so the first question I can see on the list is from Armin, and he's asking what to do if everybody is used to Masquerade. The one who shows the alternatives then is considered as insane.
Well, if everyone is used to Masquerade, it's almost like someone's got to say, you know, the emperor has no clothes on, right? And everyone sees it, but no one wants to say it. I mean, it's to me, it's a bit of a philosophical question. You know, Martin Fowler, I think, once, I'm going to be paraphrasing his quote. If you're not happy with the organization, so you either have to change your organization or change your organization, right? Either change what you can or get out, and it's easier said than done, right? Especially in today's day and age, you know, jobs, you know, availability, supply and demand. But I am a true believer that sooner or later we're going to reach a threshold, and there is not going to be much tolerance for more for nonsense. A lot of it is just nonsense. A lot of transactional business, a lot of dysfunction and disservice. So I would really, if the person is properly positioned in an organization, to have meaningful conversation with people that are in charge of organizational design and dynamics, and people that are actually influential, maybe that's where he or she needs to start. I realize something else. Sometimes if you just keep preaching to wrong people, you're not going to get far. Sometimes you need to cut across and talk to those that actually make a difference and want to listen to you. And if you realize no one wants to listen to you, well, then I guess it's a personal question. How tolerant are you going to be? So, but I would imagine that it's not like, and most of the time, majority of people understand what's happening. It's the matter of who's going to pull the plug, and when, and how.
Gene, to me, that is where the volunteering principle comes in. So I would look for people and start with a small part of people that really believe in this, and start with them, and do not punish the other people who don't believe in this.
I agree. That's why in large-scale Scrum, we do not force people into it. So by the way, interesting, there's so many different facets, there's so many different dimensions when we use volunteering, for instance, in large-scale Scrum. And by the way, it is Scrum. Scrum and large-scale Scrum should be almost synonymous to you. If people do not want to be a part of a product development group, we'll let them out. If people wish to join because they're excited about it, then we'll let them in. So much by volunteering. Creating a community is by volunteering. We cannot force people into a community. That's a real community, like a meetup. Like if, for instance, Peter, you or Taggy, you can't force anyone to be a part of your meetup, but also if people want to join, I'm sure they can do it. So that's the essence of it, of course. People shouldn't be punished for not being willing to get on the bandwagon and to speak, definitely for speaking up.
Thank you, Gene. So we're moving to the next one. how can we make sure POs can actually make decisions regarding prioritization, etc.? Most of the time, the people who actually make the decisions are higher up, I assume, in the hierarchy.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, so this is something I'm gonna go back to one of the slides I had there. So this is, I'm taking this from this is from the Large Scale Scrum website. In fact, these are all free graphics you can pick anytime from there. So the problem is this: when an organization, so first of all, it's about centricity. What are we centric about? Are we centric around product development? Are we developing in a customer-centric, user-centric, feature-centric, product-centric way? Does business drive prioritization? Then if so, I would say it is relatively easy. It should be easy to find a person for the role of a product owner, as long as you can create a blueprint of what this product would look like. If you present a mishmash of technical work to anyone on business side that has no customer centricity, then it's going to be super hard for you to find a real product owner. Now, this is not just defining a product. This is also defining a product and then blueprinting teams that would be supportive of this product development, right? So when we see it is hard to find a real product owner at the senior enough, but not too senior level, because we don't need to go way up to the CEO or CIO or CEO level. We need to be at, like, for instance, if you're doing internal business development, you need to be at the level of maybe head of business operations or head of HR or head of a trading desk. At that level, yes, you need to be. But if you don't understand, if your organization has misunderstanding about the role of a product owner, and that's the person who sets priorities, then most likely we will see a lot of digression to something like this, the Masquerade here on the left-hand side. This person is going to push away from the table and say, oh, no, I'm not doing that. I can't possibly do this all nitty-gritty stuff. I cannot prioritize every technical task in your technical backlog. I cannot write stories and write acceptance criteria on these 100 Jira tickets. If that's how the role of a product owner is being treated, then of course it will be almost impossible to find a real product owner. So that's why in large scale Scrum we're very clear up front. And we, by the way, we do this during the initial phase of less adoption, when we form a product group, when we do a lot of prep work. We just say, we don't just flip a switch overnight and say, now we go. We do it, we flip a switch, but we do a lot of prep work before that. We also identify the right person to become a product owner, as well as supportive individuals that will be the users and customers that will be supporting that person to provide clarifications to teams. So the way we define our products or services would be very critical. Based on that, we may or may not have any chance of finding a real product owner.
Okay, then the next question is it possible that masquerades happen because traditional managers can't find their place in an agile organization? How to repurpose traditional managers?
Very good question. So one of the, and again, this is not a framework specific discussion. This is agnostic of any frameworks. I'm just falling back on some of the experiments and experiences that I know of. For instance, in large scale Scrum, the big tabloid you should expect, see, we all are for job security and salary security, but not for role security. So if you have a vast volume, if a huge volume of managers, then of course the question is, how did you end up in a position like this? Why do you have so many middlemen? If I were to think from a standpoint of a businessman, or from a standpoint of a sole proprietor, or an investor, a stockholder, I'll be worried that my company, or a company where I have a stock, has so much residual internal waste. But to answer your question, of course, if we go through less adoption, for example, we are very serious about this question when we address it with senior management, we need to make sure that people are given an opportunity to choose. Specifically, these managers may be great individual contributors, and they're willing to roll up sleeves and jump on teams and deliver value. Then if so, what needs to be done is them being given a sense of comfort that by becoming doers as opposed to people's managers, they're not going to be losing their seniority, they're not going to be losing their compensation, and they're still going to be promoted and become more senior organizational. If someone has become a manager because they want to manage others, that's just a bad drive in the first place. I don't believe in very hierarchical organizations. Of course, if that's not an option, you maybe want to give this person an opportunity to go to a different organization, to a different part of the organization where there is no agile transformation, or there is no less adoption. I can only allude to large-scale Scrum, because in large-scale Scrum we let people in or out. We give them an option. We give an opportunity. Do you want to be a part of it, or do you want to leave? And of course, you give people an opportunity to hone their craft. If maybe a manager used to be a great back-end Java developer, and now they just need to hone their craft and maybe learn front-end. And they're willing to do it as long as you incentivize them in the right way. Behaviors you seek or promote are behaviors you're going to see. And of course, if none of that works, then maybe it's just a question of, does this person fit the organization? Do you want to have someone around who doesn't really add any tangible value, but is just there because this role has been there historically? I don't think it's a good way to flatten organizations by dramatic force reduction and letting people out in the street. And we've seen quite a bit of it, over years, and lately too. I know some large financial institutions that have done it recently. It's a bad way to do it. It's like dramatically losing a lot of weight, percentage of your weight, and it's just unhealthy. If you are doing this, you have to do it in a more methodical, in a more sequential way. And this is, I refer to this as organizational flattening, but it's much healthier. Okay. Back to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Gene. So we've got about 3 minutes, 4 minutes max, so maybe we can have another time box question answered. So the next one high up on my list is, could you elaborate more on alternatives for proxy POs? In my experience, a high-level PO for real prioritization is too busy to be there for the development team.
So first of all, in Scrum, there's no such term. I could just play silly and say, what's a proxy? And that would engage in the conversation. Someone would have to define what a proxy is. To me, a proxy effectively means I don't want to do my job immediately. I'm going to delegate it to someone else who has a lower pay grade. The reason why we have so much proxy and proxy of a proxy, and you bring a BA in my end, I'm going to bring BA in my end, tech versus biz, is because the role of a product owner is misunderstood. Scrum misunderstood. And could be miseducated, could be misdelivered initially by whoever delivered initial knowledge. If you properly define the role, and in large-scale Scrum, it is a pretty key role. When the product owner can support up to 8 teams, it is natural someone's going to ask, well, how come? This person writes stories for 8 teams. He moves Jira tickets for 8 teams. That's a huge undertaking. That's like 2 jobs for the same, 3 jobs for the same paycheck. Well, that's not the role of a product owner. In large-scale Scrum, for instance, we strongly require that all clarifications flow as much as possible from users and customers onto teams. This person, the product owner, is not responsible for nitty-gritty tactical stuff. They're responsible for strategic stuff, just like they're meant to do. That's really down to how well you identify, you understand, and you define the role. Right? So of course, if none of this, if systemically, organizationally, there were some bad mistakes made in the first place, identifying the role, then of course, you're going to have this proxy of a proxy of a proxy, and then there are the Berlin Wall or the Chinese spiky wall, and then over to technology side and more translation there. Who wants that? This wall has to crumble. There shouldn't be a wall like this. There shouldn't be any translation. Developers talk directly to users and customers. And of course, a product owner is there to set strategic priorities. It's not about knowing everything. It's about knowing where to get information if needed, right? I can give you some analogy with in-house construction where someone, sets priorities on what to build first, what to decorate first, without knowing much details about technical implementation of it, like plumbing or masonry or ceramic tiles or woodwork. If I'm a product owner, if I live in the house, it's my house, I'm going to tell you what I need to do in order of priority. You go ahead and figure out how much it's going to cost, and then we can trade off back and forth. So it's really down to, so large scale Scrum is Scrum, by the way. And I'm referring to this as, if we don't understand Scrum, for example, and the product owner is the role of Scrum, then of course in large scale Scrum, we're going to have challenges. But if we understand Scrum well, large scale Scrum becomes so natural, so easy. It is, by the way, it's not scale, it's a descaling. We're moving away from the term we're scaling up and we're building up. We are, in fact, we are removing stuff. We're making things simpler. It's descaling.
Thank you very much.